Welcome, everyone. It's a great pleasure to welcome Dick Averns back to Nickle at Noon to talk about art and mental health. In addition to working as curatorial coordinator at the University of Calgary's Founders Gallery at the Military Museums, Dick maintains an active practice spanning art, writing, and curating. Art is actually his second career, having previously worked in business management, including a stint at the Bethlehem Royal Hospital, formerly known as Bedlam, the world's oldest psychiatric institution in the UK. As a researcher, Dick has held 2 Tri-Council approved Research Ethics Board certificates for working with human subjects, both of those investigating mental health through art. As a practitioner, Dick was named in 2017 by Canadian Art Magazine as one of Canada's leading post-secondary art educators, incorporating wellness into his teaching. And in 2020, Dick received the Mayor's Leadership Award for Healing Through the Arts. For today's presentation, timed for Mental Illness Awareness Week, Dick will be delivering a wonderful talk about his latest major curatorial project, Perspectives from Within. Thank you, Dick.
So, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm assuming that everybody can see me or hear me and see the presentation here. Otherwise, I'll be looking for something in the chat function that's not actually working. So I'm going to jump right in, and we'll highlight that today I am here under the auspices of my work with Site-C Projects, which is the creative arm for the Organization for Bipolar Affective Disorders, and that is the basis of my being here. Here's an overview of what I'm going to present today. I'm going to give a little bit of insight to Mental Illness Awareness Week and what this is, talk about Site-C Projects and Obad. I do want to address the stigma of feeling disabled through art, and that's different than feeling disabled through art. And then I will talk about perspectives from within, and of course some Q&A at the end. So basically, there is no health without mental health. Sometimes the term circulates that everybody has mental health, and some people find that a little bit problematic. I think this is a better take on the situation. Not everyone is happy with the term illness, and that's why I'm going to talk a little bit about disability. And so the purpose, though, of Mental Illness Awareness Week is opening the eyes of Canadians to the reality of mental illness. It's also about the Canadian Psychiatric Association. It's an initiative initially created by them. It's now coordinated by the Canadian Alliance on Mental Illness and Mental Health in cooperation with other organizations and supporters across Canada, hence my work currently with Site-C Projects and the Organization for Bipolar Affective Disorder. So, Obad has been around for about 3 decades. Site-C Projects is a more recent iteration that uses creativity and art as a creative dialogue around individual and community mental wellness. Obad actually provides peer support through regular meetings in Calgary and Edmonton. That's for anybody with mood disorders or their family. And there's a deep history behind Site-C. Anthony Preston is the founder, former long-term board member with Obad. And going back to the 1990s, they developed the Marion McGrath Gallery at the Calgary Association for Self-Help, one of the first programmers to do that kind of work in Canada. So, in terms of stigma and this being Mental Illness Awareness Week, it's important to mention that not everyone's comfortable with the word illness or the D word, which is disability. And whilst the Perspectives from Within project that I'm presenting today is not explicitly under the umbrella of disability arts, it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge that there is a long tradition of artists working in the realm of mental illness, mental health, mental wellness under the umbrella of disability arts. Today we'll hear people talking about deaf, disability, and mad arts. In fact, this is a term you will find mad arts listed under the Canada Council for the Arts. And so the adoption of language by people with lived experience is something that is privileged and recognized by our leading federal arts funder. In addition to my work with Site C and Obad, there are many other organizations in Canada, such as Tangled Arts, Gallery Gachet, named after Van Gogh's doctor, the Museum of the Mind at the Bethlehem Royal Hospital, the former Bedlam, Cunningham Dax in Australia, the Macmullen in Edmonton at the Royal University Hospital, likewise the Nina Haggerty, and here in town we have the National Access Arts Centre, formerly known as Indefinite Arts, and Studio C, run by Prospect Employment Services. So in using the word disability, it does afford protection under legislation. So some people will feel comfortable using that word, but the notion of disclosure is something that's very much open to only the choice of a particular artist. This work by Richard Boulet, exhibited most recently in 2017 in the Nickle galleries here at the University of Calgary. Have you ever seen two dogs fighting? That is a form of intimacy. And in proposing Richard's work, myself as the curator for this group show, as tangential to the history of disability arts, this was something new for Richard. He hadn't had his work curated or theorized in that way before. But what he did say was, although I haven't considered myself as a disabled artist or making work under the mantle of disability arts, certainly my life experience with schizophrenia does at times render me disabled. And I thought that was a really apposite way of incorporating art practice into the umbrella of disability arts. So with language, we would, of course, want to be making sure that we're talking about a person that lives with schizophrenia, not a schizophrenic, or worse, a schizo. Here's a cross stitch. Richard often makes very small texts within his work, and I've used examples of his in many different talks over the years, and he is now being curated into the Perspectives from Within show that I'm presenting today. And here we have this much smaller section within one of the larger quilts, one long, brutally mangled epiphany. Oh, well. So there's a sense of dark humor there, but there's also within the larger realm of language, there's the choice that he makes in using these words. It's not something that is laid upon him. And likewise with the disclosure, particular conditions should be respected. I was diagnosed in my 40s and now lead a fully medicated lifestyle. And so sometimes I do say to people, you might think I'm a heretic. Really, I'm just a theoretic. And that's a personal choice. I would put that under the theory of cripping, if anyone's interested to talk about that later. So it's down to the choice of an artist to refer to their symptomatology as they wish. So historically, before we move into the show itself, and a little bit more about the art, there has been the distinct entity of disability arts. And here's an example of Tangled Arts and a dance by individuals with physical disabilities. And clearly, this would be disabled artists making dance work from the perspective as a physically impaired and disabled person. So that's the territory of early forms of disability art. And so there are some people that feel that, however, related health challenges should actually be normalized. Mainstreaming is a phrase that you hear in schools. So this would be somewhat different than the distinct preserve of disability arts and rather more an integrated approach. Theoretically, there's also more recently a Venn diagram of different circles of existence, and one in which disability studies is recognized, where disabled people or people with disabilities are a social or cultural category. And that could be something that is fluid between mainstreaming and the preserve of disability arts on its own. So again, historically, going back to the 70s and 80s, era of political activism, the disabled people's movement. Of course, we have a lot of civil rights initiatives that are happening through the 1960s, 70s, gay pride and so forth. And this particular time, there was more art being made by non-disabled people, and disabled people, however, were beginning to use their arts to respect their own experiences rather than having their experiences represented by somebody else who was not disabled. So where are we now? Well, in the 21st century, sometimes you hear the term arts and disability. So is that the same thing? And It's not the same thing, but it does allow the possibility for non-disabled individuals to lead activities for individuals that perhaps do consider themselves ill or disabled in some way. So residential homes, seniors facilities, schools, daycares, and so forth are all areas and territories where arts and disability may operate under a more fluid, perhaps less political realm, but still front and center an effort to make change or bring a part of a particular perspective or issue to the forefront. So let's look at perspectives from within. This was an initiative created as a co-production between CARFAC Alberta. I used to hold a part-time job with them as their engagement coordinator, and my work as a contract artistic director with Obad and Site C Projects gave this cross-fertilization for an initiative in which we put out a call, an open call for any artist in Alberta to submit work for this juried exhibition that would be exhibited at the project space of CARFAC Alberta in Edmonton. And so origins are that we were seeking visual artwork in any media that critically engages with mental health in the broadest sense. Particularly interested in lived experience, and that could be therapy, art therapy, psychiatry, psychology, mood disorders, addictions, a patient's experience or similar. Artists at any stage of their career, really important factor, not privileging established artists, giving them a leg up, or senior artists endorsing what they've already done. So here's an installation view of the project space with 3 different artists' works, photographs in a triptych in the background by Wes Bell. And then we have a diptych on the right, and then a couple of sculptures, smaller sculptures in the foreground. We have here work by Christian Gayers in the back and Risa Gundersen on the left. We had 9 different artists in this particular exhibit. It was challenged because of COVID, and we really felt that the merit of the work warranted trying to create a larger and more expanded, perhaps focused exhibit where we could, instead of working in small exhibit space with 9 artists and 1 to 3 works each, what if we could mount a large exhibition with 5 or 6 works and they each have many, many more works? And so that's what's actually going to be happening now. One example again from the previous exhibition in Edmonton, Maren Elliott with Smoosh, been dealing with a lot of anxiety and depression, had lost her art practice. The sketchbook was just a writer's block for her. And so doodles on Post-it notes and so forth were the way that she got back into her own work, and a kind of wry, but very upfront, hey, here I am, this bag, this dress, and these tits, smoosh. Krista Acheson was one of the artists that's in the show, and I'm now getting front and center into perspectives from within 2.0, if you will. And I can highlight that this exhibition will have over 3 dozen works, 6 different artists. 2 of the artists are self-taught, and 1 only recently is considered herself an artist and started exhibiting. Others are more established. We have artists of many different backgrounds. Some are addressing issues of LGBTQ. Others are reflecting in some of their work an indigenous background. Some of the artists are quite young, in their 20s or their 30s. Others are much older, in their late 50s or 60s. And this exhibition will open 4 weeks today on November the 4th at Contemporary Calgary in their Grotto Gallery. It'll be an immersive installation with over 5,000 square feet of curated space with these 6 artists. So for the first iteration in our Edmonton show, Krista Acheson presented this small, very, I think, poetic, somewhat of a sad ode, perhaps, of It's Not the Boat. And you can see the tears flowing out of the individual's eye and body, and the water being bailed out in an ongoing cycle, somewhat of a Sisyphean or Ouroboros even concept you might find. And so Krista made this work from the series Inside Out. She's a self-taught artist, also goes under the name of Jerry Harden, has a musician, a professional musician practice, and her sculptural depictions are addressing psychiatric symptoms, expanding on the DSM-5, so that's the Diagnostical and Statistical Manual. It's the clinical Bible, if you will, for psychiatry. And it's from her point of view as someone that's experienced conditions, specifically bipolar 1. And she had made these smaller works as prototypes for larger works, making the best of it here. You see this individual whose arms are truncated into needles. She's vomiting thread and creating this extremely long scarf that cascades down and really kind of elevates the figure. And this work we felt would be really dynamic as somewhat larger. And here you can see the figure, the sculpted figure, life-size in the truck a week ago when I went up to Edmonton. I definitely got a lot of looks from people driving back from Edmonton with this character in the front seat of the van. Constance. This work really struck us on our curatorial support team. I've had Anthony Preston and Kai Corvella, board chair at the time and executive director for Obad. We also had an independent juror, Sophia Marlowe, on our panel for the selection of these works. She's a registered recreational art therapist and social work graduate from here at the U of C. And here we have this childlike figure reaching out for the flower in front, a sense of bloom, but the hair flowing back in almost tumor-like mass. And in fact, when I met the artist last week for the first time and described the hair as a tumor, Krista said, absolutely, yeah, I imagined it as a tumor. The weight of disability as a growth that you otherwise don't see, and the need for a crutch to hold it up as this dark cloud hovers over you. Now you can see the work having been made life-size. You can also see the life-size version of It's Not the Boat in the background. And Krista's work really will take on the mainstay of large three-dimensional sculptures in the show, along with some of her earlier smaller works. And you can see here, for instance, Bloom Where You're Planted. And I think the titles of these works, and even though there is this sense of being held back by the, it's not quite a ball and chain, but stuck to the ground, but nevertheless growing, even flowers coming out of these wounds. I do think that her work is incredibly powerful as a self-taught artist for expressing the possibility for hope, but nevertheless laying bare and visualizing what people might otherwise see as invisible. Wes Bell's an artist that we also exhibited in Edmonton, one of the 9 artists. And here we can see 3 of his Wrapped series photographs. Clearly constriction and nature are part of what we're looking at there. And so he's addressing growth in tension with constriction, looking at the organic and visceral responses, very much an emotional representation of dogged survival. And these are his words, seeking to overcome the chains of depression and an intense engagement between humankind and nature. So Wes went to ACAD several decades ago, actually became a really successful fashion photographer. Here's a couple of close-ups of the Wrapped work. And these will be exhibited again in a slightly different format, many more of them at Contemporary Calgary. So here's an example of Wes Bell as a successful fashion photographer living in Milan for many years and also in New York City, ultimately finding himself as an inpatient for a short time at a psychiatric hospital in New York, and then returning to Alberta and now pursuing a fine art photo career. He's actually in a major exhibit currently in Germany, along with the like of the Beschers and Edward Batinsky. The second series that Wes will be showing is known as Kallus. And here he's looking at wounds, he's looking at healing, he's looking at these ruptured forms of growth on trees. And this was made during the COVID years. And really he looked and tried to find himself and recall particular episodes of his life that had been painful and that he'd overcome. So these are really a nuanced, for him, personal language of healing and overcoming trials and tribulations. I do think that there's somewhat of a sexual connotation to these works, and his photography career was varied. The editorial works that I showed that might have been somewhat hot and sexy, I think are coded in a different way within this particular work here. And there will be a grid of 18 of these works from his Kallus series that will be exhibited upstairs, in fact, on the top level space next to the dome at the former planetarium, which is now Contemporary Calgary. So very beautiful, yet painful expose of personal healing. Risa Gundersen, and the compelling image here I find of the mask or the three graces, is an artist who is really sharing with us in this instance a lot of work from her recently completed MFA. She's taught also sessionally, I believe so, at the University of Alberta, currently teaching at Athabasca University. And with Risa's work, she's very engaged with notions of performativity and femininity in private spaces, and being explicit about her experiences of intrusive thoughts, anxiety and depression, turmoil set with the intimacy of home environments, and created these really, I agree, perhaps challenging figures, but very honest and open narrative around compulsive picking, scratching habits, and anxiety attacks. I think really relevant with her is that there's the picture plane that reveals products supposedly perhaps as panaceas for anxiety or body type, face masks, candles, beauty products, paraphernalia, and so forth that you might think of as wellness items. But she creates pretty tense encounters, but clearly there's not a lot of serene pleasure in these. And so she's denying historically representations of the nude in art history. So we have here oil on watercolor rag paper, Danae 2019. And these works are exhibited unframed with grommets nailed into the wall. The reclining nude. Woman in blue. So these are larger tableau works, 4 feet by 5 feet. And then there's some smaller works, oil on Yapo paper. And so here's one, a self-portrait in bike shorts. And so this work is really coming out of the picture plane of the wall, almost as a form of flat sculpture. I love the yellow blotch and staining or picking through the shorts, or maybe it's just paint from the studio, but emblematic of some of the other scarification of the body, and think of that yellow area on the back of her left thigh in relationship, say, to the yellow dandelion that the Constance figure is reaching out for in the earlier work of Constance that we saw. The coping mechanisms, the mask, the beauty products, the scrunchie, and the cut glass of beverage on the side of the bathtub. Richard Boulet, whose work I've already touched on, and has had his work exhibited extensively across Canada, has a fiber practice addressing marginalization, specifically mental health and concerns to LGBTQ+ communities. He was diagnosed many years ago with schizophrenia and has since adopted artistic strategies embracing mental health. He works part-time at the CMHA in Edmonton. He also helps run a textile group there, and his job there helps supplement his AISH income, and that, of course, is the assured income for the severely handicapped. And so in profiling a nationally renowned artist, he's exhibited at the Textile Museum of Canada, but again, thinking about that history of disability arts and disability, and that we're showcasing an artist whose existence is highly predicated on income through the Alberta program for the severely handicapped, does, I think, give a sense again of how he recognizes in his own words that whilst I don't think of myself as a disabled artist, my condition has at times rendered me disabled. So I'm just coming back to that context point of the introduction there, even though I would say that this is a show that theoretically and art historically you could think is more rooted in the contemporary realm of arts and disability. And Richard says, I like the way he provides this in the first person, that he's doing well these days, but I feel it's important to disclose that we live with mental illness. And that's a collective we, partially because he's got a new series of collaborative works, but I think he's also speaking to the nature of stigma, and collectively we all have mental health, right? And so whilst he talks about mental illness in this particular instance, and again, that is in alignment with Mental Illness Awareness Week and this talk today, the bottom line for him is that collaboration reduces stigma and allows for new pathways for making art. So let's have a look at some more of Richard's art. Here you see him, literally this photo was taken right upstairs through the floor of me here. I really appreciate the support of Nickle Galleries again for me to be able to present during these COVID times, and that we have the beautiful work behind me of Fiona Kuad, a recently graduated MFA student of the program here at the University of Calgary. And I chose this particular picture, not just because it references Richard having had a major solo exhibition here recently, but the large book that you see in the display case next to him was made around the time of his prodromal phase, which is the onset of his schizophrenia and the uncertainty for him around image making, mark making, and this very much, we could think of it as collage, bricolage, three-dimensional sculpture, fiber-based on the book cover. And he eventually moved away from this three-dimensional form of fiber sculpture, and yet is now returning to fiber and textile works that I would argue are a corollary to this work from 20 or 30 years ago. We see the large quilt in the background, scream like a shot deer. And then the subtext is a constant re-examination of the meaning of the system. And this really embodies Richard and his commitment to a constant re-examination. Here you can see me in front of one of his other large quilts. And on the right, you'll see that this photograph, and thank you, Dave Brown, for these pictures. I'm sorry the credit didn't get in there. Psychosis, hope on the wings of a prayer and treatment. And so here you see a close-up of one of these small cross stitches actually in the quilt. I mentioned that earlier. And so we see this sandwich of the hope of the wings on a prayer and the psychosis, the weight of mental illness bearing down, but then the treatment, the pulsing indicator coming up from below. And again, I think that the nature of the text-based work, but also the discombobulated words on the left embody this title for the work of a neologism. Here we have Richard's ExVodo. Increasingly, he's beginning to address religion and his background in Catholicism within the work. And ExVodo really is rooted in the idea of a gift or a divine passing of a commitment within predominantly the Christian church. And we have here these desperately repeated action that goes the way of the ghost. So there's that idea of a spirit, there's that idea of the passing on, but of course something that goes the way of the ghost is also a metaphor or an analogy or synonym for things not actually having value, or you don't know what happens to them. And so there's a conflict and a tension in the ExVodo here, and Richard's beginning to address this work more. Currently, I will add that Richard's work is the subject of a forthcoming major publication being pulled together by curator Wayne Beowalt, former curator of the likes of Janet Cardiff and George Beers Miller at the Venice Biennale. And there's a major Canada Council grant behind this publication. Richard has some of his works currently in Venice, in Italy. And also our host today, Michelle Hardy, will be writing an essay for that. And I will be conducting an interview with Richard that will also be published within this new work. So clearly, from his prodromal phase in the 90s to a real challenge of literally living on the street. And this kind of work, I talked with Richard about it just last week when I was in Edmonton, and ordinarily, I tend to eschew didactic art, and it's not something that I would commit myself to addressing unless it was a show just about didactic art and spoon feeding. But the power and the strength of self-identifying as no longer homeless, how many people do you know that would be bold enough or honest and open enough to put that out there? And so I felt that this was a really important historical work of Richard's to be included in this exhibition. More recently, this work relates to the evolution of Richard's work. And I want to remind you of the large book in the vitrine next to the portrait of Richard, where I talked about this three-dimensional sculpting on the book cover during his prodromal phase of multiple states and prior to his diagnosis with schizophrenia. This more recent work, I Need Rage, So I Rage Hope. And the title of the exhibit here was Richard Boulet, Rage, Hope. And this work did have some collaborators or other individuals. There's two embroidered panels at the bottom done by machine embroidery. These are based on drawings by his nephews. And there's also some crocheted works in the textile group that Richard works with at the CMHA, that's the Canadian Mental Health Association in Edmonton. He works with a number of individuals who are perhaps more craft-based, and so he will purchase these dolls' clothes and these knitted dishcloths, and then incorporate them as the basis for his tableau, if you will. So you'll see an increasingly looser, ephemeral, ragged around the edges way of working, which I think is emblematic of mental illness and how you don't really always see or expect and should not expect things to be neat and tidy, although Richard also has a work called Keeping It Neat and Tidy. But the idea of raging, and in fact, going back to my work, working at the Bethlehem Hospital, the former Bedlam Mental Institution, at lunchtimes I used to go to the museum in a tiny gatehouse of this old mansion and estate, and they had the two sculptures that used to be atop the gateposts, and one of them was Raging Madness and the other was Raving Melancholy. And so the idea of rage clearly has associations with not just anger, but mental distress. But the idea of raging hope, I think, is an incredibly positive way of embodying mental illness. And so more recently, and again, from that embodiment of mental illness, transforming it into mental wellness, that's an important consideration. Marilyn is now Richard's collaborator, met her at the CMHA, and she has spent most of her time in Edmonton. There's a little bit of a bio here. She indicates that she did live in Calgary for 12 years when she began her accounting career. And she then worked in the garment industry, but making art is new to her, by which I mean the last 2 years or 3 years. Not diagnosed until 2017 with BPD or borderline personality disorder, major depressive orders, and a few other disorders. She just throws that in there. And again, these are her words. And so for somebody that's in their late 50s or their 60s and spent the majority of their life without a diagnosis, really speaks to the challenges that some of these individuals have endured and that are now willing to share, particularly when Marilyn indicates that she has struggled with mental wellness since her late teens. Started collaborating with Richard 2 years ago, and only now finding my voice as an artist and realizing how my craft becomes art. And I think this is a really positive indication from a curatorial perspective of how to embody the possibility for a positive realm within mental illness. And importantly, of course, not to either stigmatize, think of individuals as poster childs or individuals being held up and in some way reified because of their disability, which would be wholly inappropriate. This collaborative work, 8 feet wide and 6 feet deep, has many different cross stitches, embroideries, and contributions from a number of different people at the textile group at the CMHA, but primarily the first work that Richard and Marilyn worked on together, and this will be exhibited here at Contemporary Calgary. There's a little close-up for you. And so this work about food, about gardening, about sustenance, and also that I was born into a well-built home on high ground. I had my own stereo as a teenager and a family car to drive. And then we talk about the butterfly, the moth, the flea, flea, flea. We talk about the green growing grass, the red raspberries. There's also talk about not liking rhubarb, for instance. And so there's Mother's Wild Garden and a sense of fun, growth, freedom, there's a fecundity, a florid nature to these works, both in the build-up. If it was a painting, like with Risa Gundersen's work, we'd be thinking of these fibers as impasto, but in this particular instance, there's really a snaking, a weaving, and multiple different, very technical approaches to create and build up and stack, for instance, these multiple panels. Now we have a close-up of Richard and Marilyn's most recent collaboration on a project called A Molecule of Perfect. This work has currently been on display at the Macmillan Gallery at the University Hospital in Edmonton. It had been delayed and postponed twice because of COVID, from last year and then into this year. And then with the fourth wave that we're now experiencing, the gallery was sequestered by the hospital as an extra rest space for nurses. And so publicly, the work has been seen very little. If you do go to the Macmillan website, there's a fabulous virtual tour that you can take with very high resolution and rollover functions for personal explanations about the work by Marilyn and Richard. Some of the works are going to be moved into a public atrium space, and we were very fortunate that the Macmillan agreed to release 2 of these works to travel down to Calgary for a forthcoming installation here. And so here we have the close-up. And it has Marilyn's name on it, right? There's a sense of ownership. And driving down here today on Crowchild Trail, seeing that large billboard just between the railway station, University Station, and 24th Avenue, the University of Calgary has that billboard, "Own Cancer," is what it says today. And so words are problematic for some people in that they become labels, but they're important for ownership. And so here again, we find, many times I've been discombobulated, and the top right, another old woman. And so the knitted, crocheted, knitted dishcloths at the bottom that are purchased by somebody at the textile club, and Marilyn describes herself sometimes as an old woman, but there's that pejorative, negative connotation, of course, of an old woman. And so this is countered through excerpts of conversations by the artists with their textile group. What do you think of when you hear the phrase old woman? Well, lively, wisdom, gutsy. These are embodiments that are giving incredibly positive traits to the creation of Marilyn's work within the new collaborations. We have the snap bang. We have the snap bang, snap bang, snap bang, snap bang. There's a sense of word poetry here. You could think of histories of sound art and text art that you make these sounds in your head. And Richard is incredibly informed by noise art and sound art, the likes of John Cage, but also of text-based poets from the Canadian oeuvre. But ultimately, is this type of story needed anymore, or have we moved on? So the last artist that I want to cover is Brad Nessic. And so we have a Métis visual artist whose practice focuses on mental illness, empathy, consciousness, and flourishing. And Brad lives with bipolar disorder. He's recently completed a research creation PhD in psychiatry, incorporating art, up at the University of Alberta, and is just starting a postdoctoral fellowship at York University, creating work on addiction, organ transplantation, and medically assisted dying. And I'm indebted to Kai Corvella, the executive director of Obad, but more specifically, Dr. Andy Bullock at the Matheson Center for Mental Health Research and Education, part of the Hotchkiss Brain Institute here at the University of Calgary, for introducing me to Brad's work. I did a pop-up workshop and display of art from the Recognition, Validation, Reassurance Mental Health public art project that I'd conceived, incorporating also some screened works of Brad Nessic here in Mac Hall. And that would have been 3 years ago. And I've subsequently seen the dissertation work that Brad created, and really pleased to now incorporate somebody of this status and accomplishment into this upcoming exhibition, Perspectives from Within. So here we have an installation view of The Waiting Room from his cancer series. And Brad worked with individuals undergoing facial reconstruction. Of course, a lot of our identity is based on what people see in us, what we look like. And I mean, we could talk about undercurrents of physiognomy and reading people's inner personalities through the way that they look as, you know, the next step, say, to phrenology. Clearly, these have been somewhat debunked, but I think that they're histories, again, that we could look at and talk about in theorizing these works. But Brad worked with these individual patients who were undergoing facial reconstruction and worked with them to revisualize who they are. So these are video stills, and I have a series of details. So you could imagine that these works are moving around. They are forming, deforming, reforming. There's a formation of affirmations, but also challenges within the picture planes. Two females and two males within this series. So these works will be exhibited on large 65-inch screens. They literally lean up against the wall or tucked into a corner. The crying of a male, the outward expression of pain, acknowledging that males are a hugely underserved population when it comes to mental illness. Highest form of causality of death in Alberta, males from the age of 19 to 34 is suicide, and individuals that live with bipolar or schizophrenia, and we have 3 in this exhibition, are at a considerably higher risk of suicide than any other set of symptomatologies or background characteristics. This last image speaks to a collaboration that is now underway between Brad and the composer Gary James Joines. And in the dome upstairs, the former planetarium, there will be 2 very ethereal, immersive, meditative works in an adjunct exhibition called More Perspectives from Within. And there's just this one still here of this beautifully cascading water and starlights that are coming out. Amazing soundtracks that accompany them. And so downstairs in the large gallery space, we'll have work by all 6 artists, including a silent projection by Brad and one of his first collaborations with Gary. But then upstairs, there'll be an hour of these 2 back-to-back ongoing looped immersive, really escapist environments that are a place in which gallery goers can lose themselves and forget about some of the other challenges that might be existing. So last couple of minutes before we have 10 minutes left for wrapping up Q&A and so forth. Here we have Anthony Preston, the man behind Site C Projects, long-term board chair. I want to really give a shout out and an acknowledgement to him. Here I am with Kai Corvella. Again, these were install shots up at the first iteration, and Obad running weekly projects, drop-ins, support group sessions, peer support with facilitators for individuals with mood disorders and family members, not confined just to bipolar. So what is this show all about? Well, there is a curatorial thesis, and if I was to distill it down into a few points, the perspectives from within, and I also want to acknowledge Kai for the title in this exhibition, we're aiming to facilitate insight and enhance personal self-reflection to support individual and collective mental well-being. We acknowledge that mental illness can be lonely, but a shared vision for wellness actively confronts and reduces stigma. That all Canadians face mental health challenges, and that artworks like these can engage audiences to make a positive impact on the way that mental health is addressed in our world, and encouraging audiences to look for yourself in these artworks, both as a process of reflection and as a reminder that we're not alone. And for anyone that's ever contemplated that they need help or can remember that first time of picking up the phone or making an appointment to go and see a counselor or a therapist or go to anger management or seek medication for depression, anxiety, addiction, and so forth, there is a stigma that lingers. The first step for anybody is often the hardest, and there's a lot of work and research that supports the role of art, not just as a pastime, but as a positive way to be able to improve mental health. And we have a large suite of public programs that will be coming in the fall and the winter at Contemporary Calgary. I think a lot of people may find it easier to go and see an exhibition or a talk about mental health by an artist in a gallery than going to, say, a group drop-in session or going to see the counselor for the first time. And so I know that from attending a support group with Obad for our first iteration of this exhibition, there was an overwhelmingly positive response from individuals in the room that could identify with the visualizations of conditions that are otherwise invisible. So I want to give my thanks to all the artists in the show and Sightsee Projects and Obad, of course, Carfax, Alberta for collaborating with the first version of this. Contemporary Calgary, been incredible partners for this show. And I know that Nickle Galleries are just wrapping up their collaboration with them on a current exhibit. Calgary Arts Development, tremendously generous funding to be able to support this project. The Nickle at Noon for hosting this, and peer support. Really, I can't underestimate enough the importance of an informal support group other than a professional support group. And ultimately, we acknowledge that this is a challenging subject and hugely challenging for individuals to put some of these works out there in public, balancing risk and respect. That's really what this is all about. So thank you very much. I'm open to questions, answers, and discussions. You can contact me through Nickle at Noon, online, LinkedIn, and I importantly put the information up here for Obad and the dates of the upcoming exhibition. So bring on any questions, and I'll turn it over to Michelle and Marla to manage a little bit the chat while I have a drink here.
Thank you so much, Dick. This was just phenomenal. So much information and such beautiful, beautiful art. I can't wait to see the exhibition. When does it open?
November the 4th.
November the 4th. Mark your calendars.
Anticipating that they will have a public opening. And so, yeah, 4 weeks tonight. Don't know the times yet, but 6 till 10, something like that. I expect all the artists to be in attendance.
Excellent. Good, good. Apart from the kudos that are coming in, a question about the slides. Just a reminder that we will clean up the video and it will be posted to our YouTube channel. So Marla, maybe you could put the link to our YouTube in the chat bar. And are there some questions?
So yeah, for the person that's actually asking, can we get the slides? I think you were sort of answering that, Michelle, in that the video will be posted, right? So yeah, I did acknowledge that some of the slides were missing attribution, like the credits for Dave Brown. My apologies on that front. And so in terms of the question from Farhan Aslam, it'd be great to know whether being able to just see a recording of this is sufficient. If there's actual, stills and images that are wanted, it would be good to know the purposes of that. And I'm open to being contacted about that, Farhan, but thank you for asking.
Great. Well, questions? Ladies and gentlemen, this is your moment. Dick, while people are hopefully typing, he says, no problem, thank you. Could you say a little bit about, this is the International Day of...
So yeah, this is
a significant day.
Mental Illness Awareness Week. And so we're right in the middle of the Mental Illness Awareness Week at the moment. And so some folks will be aware that there is a Mental Health Awareness Week that is in the spring. And so different organizations support different approaches to causes. I particularly like the Mental Illness Week because some people are ill, they really are. And so it's important for those that need help, that sometimes getting a diagnosis, like for myself with Tourette's, incredible energy, a long history of unwanted intrusive thoughts, suicidal ideation, and depression, anxiety. I come from a family that's had, problems with addictions. Once I actually was diagnosed with Tourette's, and then that was great. Like, oh, you mean there's some treatment for this? I can actually, when you know what it is. And so the other thing that in terms of this being Mental Illness Awareness Week, it's also Disabled Employment Awareness Month. And so in terms of, touching on some of the employment of individuals within this exhibit, I think that there is a correlation very often between mental illness and employment. And there are a lot of organizations that do work positively with that. When I mentioned Site C as an organization in town, Prospect, they're part of Prospect, which provides employment services for people with, mental health challenges and so forth. So that's a little bit of added context. I see that there is a question about publications.
Yeah.
And so let me have a look here. Favorite publications or research I'd like to direct people to who are wanting to learn more about how visiting art galleries and museums is particularly beneficial for mental wellness. So I can speak generally to that, and then I'll see whether I can come up with something specific. So the institutions that I mentioned, such as Gallery Gachet, which is an artist-run center in Vancouver that profiles artists addressing mental health. They do publish some catalogs at times, so that would be a venue that I would direct people towards. The Museum of the Mind, which is at Bethlehem Royal Hospital, they have an award-winning gallery and exhibits. Occasionally, they produce publications, but they're more of an exhibiting gallery. The aspects of visiting galleries and museums being beneficial for mental wellness, I can definitely give some specifics for that. There is an evolving practice called social prescribing, again out of the UK, early adopter for community-based art and disability arts. And so social prescribing is where a clinical and medical practitioner, such as a doctor, prescribes a non-medical treatment for a particular condition. So anxiety, isolation, loneliness, depression could be treated with a prescription to join a gallery visit group or a gardening club, for instance. And so for that question, Pat Carr, look up social prescribing. The Museum of Fine Art in Montreal has a lot of educators and an art therapist on their team. There is a pilot study that's taking place, I believe, in Montreal and another maybe in Ontario, one or two in Eastern Canada, that look at the practical benefits of visiting art galleries. And so those are some specific references for you. If I was to pick one publication, I would say look at the kingsfund.org in the UK. They have published an extensive guide to social prescribing, and that's where you would that's my favorite publication. There we go. So I hope that that's both specific and general. But I would be remiss were I not to say that Perspectives from Within will be accompanied by a publication. And so we're very fortunate that we have some casino funding through Obad. We have the grant through Calgary Arts Development, and Dr. Andy Bullock, who I mentioned earlier from the Matheson Center and is here in the group today. He and his colleague Peter Toohey will be co-authoring an essay looking at art and mental health from a neurological research perspective. I will also be writing an essay that looks at histories of art and mental health, and it will be illustrated by the work of the 6 artists. And we're working on the title, but it'll probably be something like Art and Mental Health, an Introduction. And so maybe in January, when we have our publication launch, I can tell you, Pat Carr, that that's my new favorite publication.
Dick, I have to ask about the text-based work on just behind your right shoulder.
Yes.
Is that yours or is that Fiona's?
This is Fiona's, yes. So thanks again to the Nickle. I made a brief reference during the presentation. And so, yes, in being hosted, and I love presenting these talks from a gallery. It just makes so much sense, right? Even when we get back to doing things in reality, the idea of standing on a stage, you know, being able to be in the gallery. So yeah, I talked to John Hales about a venue for making this presentation, and he suggested Fiona's current exhibition. And so, yes, nothing is so difficult as not deceiving oneself. That's the work behind me on the right. And on the left, and in reference to her art practice, and this is her MFA graduation show, looking at histories of patriarchy and power, the underpants painting. Both of these struck me as highly relevant for you know, a tangential look at our psyche, if you will.
Nice. Well, thank you for that. And just a reminder that this one MFA show will continue for another few weeks. Anyway, I'm not sure we have dates. And that the Nickle is open for visitors, but you have to book a timed ticket, and just visit the Nickle's website for that information. I have 101, ladies and gentlemen. Is there any last burning questions? Type fast.
I'm not difficult to track down. So what I will say to those that are still with us, if we have a few people, I'll give a quick overview of our public programs that we're planning to accompany Perspectives from Within. In addition to the opening reception, the following week, tentatively scheduled for Wednesday, November the 4th, Brad Nessic will be giving a community presentation in the auditorium at Contemporary Calgary, Insight to Mood Disorders and Bipolar. So Brad Nessic's the PhD in psychiatry and art artist that is in the show. And so that's for all comers. He'll be screening his video, Alberta #3, which is a first person narrative that will also be in the exhibition, exploring through syncopated monologues and vignettes, some of the challenges that he's experienced through his life and with his family. And I can also say then that in late November, we'll be having a textile workshop with Richard Boulet and Marilyn Olson, a reprise of the one that we did last month for Alberta Culture Days, which I know a couple of people in the room here attended. And so that's an opportunity. All these programs are free for members of the public to attend, and we'll be promoting that through Obad, the Alberta Craft Council, the Department of Art here, and at the AU Arts and the Kirby Center downtown. In December, I will be doing a tour, curator's tour, and social conversation that basically is pitched as Escape from Christmas. We acknowledge that Christmas, New Year, the darkest time of the calendar in the north here is often a time of great distress and high suicide rates for people. So we're not shying away from Escape from Christmas by putting on a tour. In January, we will have our publication launch, and we're inviting 3 of our artists to be on that panel. Wes Bell, who was with us today, thanks Wes, and Krista Acheson will be invited, and Risa Gundersen. So all 6 artists are being contracted and of course paid for their services. And so that's the publication launch. And we'll potentially have a presentation by Drs. Andy Bullock and Peter Toohey about their neurological research in this area. And then the final program for Bell Let's Talk Day on Friday, the 28th of January, to be confirmed, is a screening of a fabulous film called Dirty Filthy Love with Michael Sheen. It's a gripping black comedy expose of Tourette syndrome and OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. So I'll be the moderator and lived experience speaker for that, and we are hoping that we will have a neurologist with us who specializes in these areas. And that's also in relation for those that want more on that. The Tourette OCD Alberta Network, TOAN, runs out of the university here, and I'm on their board. And so there are resources, because it's recognized that provincially Tourette and OCD are underserved. So we're hoping to have one of those presenters there. But yeah, it's a great film. So there we go. But yeah, I see from Anthony,
Yeah.
he's put a note there about the importance of creativity and self-expression and whether or not I can elaborate. Well, yeah, I can, Anthony. And I think that so much mentally with anxiety, depression, and mental health conditions are invisible. They're inside. Kids are sometimes talked about as acting out, my unbridled and in my youth and teen years, uncontrolled motor tics, and my father would be shouting at me, "Richard, stop creating!" And so that was a form of the term creating, somewhat as a parent unknowing. However, when it comes to Anthony, the act of self-expression and physically embodying somehow a condition, then I think there's a visualization. There's the process, there's art as community, there's art as process. But the best answer I could give is that the process of art making, whether it's an outsider artist, an untrained artist, a hobby artist, or a professional artist, it's about self-expression, and the self is invisible. And mental health is about self-expression, but it's often invisible. And so the commonality between visual art and mental health is that visual art provides an opportunity to make that invisible self visible, and it's no longer hidden, and then we can move on.
Dick, as always, I learn so much whenever you are here and share your incredible wisdom and talent with us. Thank you so much. Another fantastic presentation.